Welcome to the library and our Authors at Your Library presentation with John Brown and his book, Missouri: An Illustrated Timeline.
Hi, good morning, afternoon.
It's close enough, it feels like, right? 200 years of heroes and roads, heartbreak and triumph. My name is Erica, and I am the adult specialist in the Science and Technology room here at Central Library. And before I introduce Mr. Brown over here, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us today. Also, please keep your microphone on mute. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature, and we will take your questions as they come in and as time allows. This program is being recorded, and it will be posted to the library's YouTube page within about a week. So please allow me to introduce John Brown, our TV news anchor, author, inventor, public speaker, and radio talk show host. He is currently a news anchor at KTVI and political correspondent with Fox 2 here in St. Louis. He previously hosted the nationally syndicated show, The Daily Buzz. He was also the anchor of Good Day Orlando on WOFL-TV, Fox 35 Orlando. He has also previously hosted a political-oriented radio talk show, John Brown's Mindset, on KTRS Radio in St. Louis, and is the inventor of bib magnets. I do want to hear about that.
That was always a little aside there. Wow.
He is the author of 7 books, mostly based on Missouri history, with 4 more books due out this year in celebration of the Missouri Bicentennial. He graduated from Bell High School and has a degree in biology and chemistry from Central Methodist University in Fayette. He also has the unusual claim to fame of living in nearly 24 locations, all in Missouri before graduation from college. He and his wife, Teresa, have 2 children and live in Webster Groves.
Well, thank you. That's a long bio. Nice, thank you, appreciate that.
My pleasure. So now before we get started, we do have a short video we would like to play to whet your appetite for some history today. Fantastic. That is fantastic. I had almost forgotten about some of those highlights of our very own history until they replayed again. So thank you for that.
Sure, and that's actually the shorter version. When I first put it together, there were so many, and again, that's what I think always gets me excited is, I had that video, I put that video together and I go back and I see those things again, I'm like, wow, there really is so much cool history in our state that even after writing all these books, I forget about stories and you go down a rabbit hole, one story you find out that leads to another one. And to me, there's just so much cool stuff that's happened in the state with the people in the state that I can churn out many more, and there will be many more books all in regards to that.
We are looking forward to that.
So is my publisher.
Oh, I bet. So yeah, I was telling you a little bit ago, this was a fun, informative, and interesting read. I probably read it a good 3 or 4 times. Because the first time I was like, oh, I just want to whet my appetite, get a taste, and then I went back through it again. I was like, wow, that really happened? Sliced bread?
Right, in show copy.
What?
I know, it's so bizarre, and those are the kind of stories that I love running into. And another thing that I found interesting in putting together this one, the most recent one with the timeline, is there are stories that happened here in Missouri that people outside of the state know about. For example, we have what's known as the Genius Highway across the top of the state of Missouri. It goes from Hannibal, really all the way across, straight over to St. Joe. The number of world leaders, brilliant people, amazing happenings across the Genius Highway blows you away. I mean, two of the 3 top-ranked generals of all time in the United States history, both grew up in small towns along that highway, with Omar Bradley and General John J. Pershing. Then you got Walt Disney, who grew up along there, Mark Twain, Pony Express, sliced bread. I mean, you just go on and on. This one little highway across the top of the state that we don't really pay that much attention to has had such a huge impact on the world, really.
Right.
And those are the kind of stories I love digging up.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It is cool, yeah.
It is really cool. So what led you, obviously it's the bicentennial year, but 200 years of Heroes and Roads, Heartbreak and Triumph. How did you get to Heroes and Roads and Heartbreak and Triumph?
Well, it's funny because I didn't know that we needed a byline. I'm like, well, it kind of explains itself. So my publisher, Reading Press here in St. Louis, he's like, well, we need some sort of byline. We started looking through everything that's happened. And my first book, Legends, which came out in 2008, we knew about all the heroes. But a lot of the stories that also happened, there are quite a few not so good guys, right? And so there are a lot of rogues in there. And then just, the things that have defined our state. And so it just kind of all was encapsulated in that one little line, 200 years of heroes and rogues, heartbreak and triumph, because that's kind of summed up our 200 years. We've been the tipping point for so many things, good and bad, right here in the middle of the state, that, we've always had that phrase, a lot of people, as Missouri goes, so goes the country, or other states that claim that too. But when it came to elections, when it came to big civil rights moments, when it came to all sorts of things, Missouri was kind of the tipping point. We're in the middle. We were this middling state in the middle of the country that was kind of this wrapped up how the rest of the country was feeling. So when demographers wanted to know how the entire populace was thinking, they would check out Missouri because we were this combination of so many things. It gave them an idea of exactly what the mood of the country was.
It's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I think is interesting is, so many people think we're just flyover country or, nothing big ever happens here because we're this medium-sized state in the middle of the country.
Right.
But the impact we've had on so many issues is huge. And I always tell the story that stuck out with me. I asked my TV agent one time, I said, why are there so many nationally known broadcasters from Missouri?
Okay.
The numbers are astronomical, from a Joe Buck to Walter Cronkite to a Rush Limbaugh to Jim Bohannon, just the number across the spectrum. You're talking different political orientations, different genres, Mary Margaret McBride, you just put on the list, like, how are this many people? So one thing, University of Missouri Journalism School, the first in the country, thanks to Walter Williams. But he said, the other thing is, nobody knows who you guys are. You're this perfect combination of everything in the country. You're a little bit north, you're a little bit south. You're a little bit East Coast, a little bit West Coast. You don't have a discernible dialect. You're all the things that makes this country interesting, all rolled up into one area. So when we put you on the national news, you can't say, well, they've got the Southern drawl. You can't say they've got that California look. They don't have the New Jersey accent. Says you guys are like this perfect combination of everything that makes up the country. And so that's always been kind of an impetus where I used to look at that as a negative. Then I realized, wait a second, that is actually unique. The fact that we're everything rolled into one isn't just blah, it's very unique.
That's really cool.
It was, right? It opened my eyes to a lot of things.
That is really cool. So, can you walk us through a little bit of the history that took Missouri Territory from a territory to a state finally?
Okay, I always call it the shortest history lesson of all time, which is, but it'll stick with you, right? So I was trying to teach my kids, how can they remember the Missouri Compromise? 1820, right? You got this territory, which I always, one historian said, if Thomas Jefferson were to do what he did in this day and age, by kind of bypassing Congress, just buying all this land, he would have been impeached.
Right.
So you guys were kind of the offspring of an illegal act. I'm like, well, that's a weird way to put it, but thank you. Okay, we're here because of that. And so I'm like, well, how do we remember? So he didn't want to let us into the country because then it would tip the scales of more slave states because we were going to be admitted as slave states. So they had to balance it out with another state, right? So they decided to let in Maine. So we were the M&M Compromise. That's when so Missouri, Maine come in at the same time, which made Missouri mad because we were supposed to be, you ready for it? This is worth the cost of admission right here. We were supposed to be the main event. But then Maine was allowed to balance things out. So, right, as stupid as that is, you'll never forget it. My kids are like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be an essay in college. I'm gonna be the only one who gets this right because of your stupid analogies, Dad. So here we come. And then the bottom line of Missouri was supposed to be the slave-free line, right? So here we are again, messed up because we're above the slave-free line, the slave state above that line. So here we are admitted we don't fit in already. We're already causing problems. And then we're admitted at that time, everything west of the Mississippi. And I never heard this until I started digging into the documents about the founding. Every state west of the Mississippi, I'm gonna try and get the wording right, was supposed to be as square as possible for governance, which I thought was interesting because it's apparently easier to govern squares. When you have properties that go, squiggles and all this kind of stuff, it's easier if everything's squared off. So a county is square, it's easier to govern that way. So everything west of the Mississippi, and when you look at a map, it makes sense. The Four Corner states, you just go down the list, they're all kind of square. Yet here we are, west of the Mississippi, we got this weird shape. So we had the initial map of Missouri, which I have in some of the books, was almost a square, other than the Mississippi River line. And then the farmer who owned almost all the land down in southeast Missouri, for whatever reason, didn't want to be a Razorback. There's no official record of why he didn't want to be in Arkansas, but he petitioned Congress, apparently was a big political donor, got the boot heel carved out, that got added to Missouri. And then a few years after statehood, we wanted more land and the plat purchase happened. So, here we were causing problems before it was ever 1900 as a state. And so it's just funny to see that, oh yeah, we've continued that trend where we bucked the norm even from our beginning of how we started.
We just keep going.
We just keep, that's what we do.
That is what we do.
Yeah.
Speaking of one of the things that we do and we do very well, Missouri wine industry.
That's, to me, should be, and I know it is a source of pride for a lot of people. You may have just seen the story the Post-Dispatch did about the gentleman who's moved in here trying to really make Augusta into this world-class destination. But when you understand Missouri's wine industry and how big of a deal it was, I mean, we saved the French wine industry. Thanks to the entomologists from here in Missouri, went over there and helped save their industry. There's actually, because I always, now it cracks me up. Because I'm not a wine guy, right? I'm just not, I don't get it. Like my wife is, like she can tell the difference between that's a 1906, not a 1904. Okay, I don't get it. So when I hear people say, well, it's not a French wine. Well, that's great because the guy who saved the French wine industry is from Missouri over there. And there's a statue of him over in Montpellier, France. So there you go, thanks to us. But the guy who also did that went out and helped cultivate Napa. So all of that it's kind of a weird way, but it all dates back to Missouri's wine country, which was Rhineland down there along Herman. And so after researching this, again, I didn't know that much about it, but when you really understand how valuable it is, how big of an impact it's had on the worldwide wine industry, it gave me a new understanding. And for me, because of the other book I have here, 100 Things to Do in Missouri Before You Die, it was another excuse to do a road trip out to Herman. And I didn't need another one, but now you have one. Go out and explore. And that to me is just one of the best destinations in the state. I love that trip, great road trip. And when you read this and understand more about it, I think it makes that trip more valuable too.
I did actually, so when, because the wine industry, I actually helped had in 1837, so I took a little bit of a deep dive.
Yeah,
Yes, because I was like, wait, what? How is all of this so cool?
it is neat.
Yes, yes, and I mean, the number of jobs that we helped grow and everything else that came along with it.
The numbers are astronomical, and it would be even bigger had it not been for Prohibition.
Right.
I mean, like we were the #2 wine producer. The number, I'm gonna be wrong on this because I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it was like the #2 wine producer in the country at that point, before Prohibition. And I don't remember if that's in there, but I remember seeing that number. Because one thing I did do when I put this book together, which I think kind of is opposite of what a lot of authors do, because when I tell them the story, they're like, I can't believe you do that. When I wrote all the entries in this book and also Missouri Legends, I actually sent it to the people and said, all right, what's right, what's wrong, what would you add, what would you take out?
Nice.
And I said, this is not about me. I'm not a historian, I'm just a guy who's really interested in history. There's a difference, I think. The historian's the guy who teaches at the university, who really, really knows this stuff. I'm just interested. And so I said, I don't care, if you get it right, I'll put your name in the book, and I have, all their names are in the book, the people who helped me. I said, I just want to tell the story of the celebration of the state.
Right.
And I want to make sure I get it right. And so it really opened people up to say, hey, you won't believe this part. And that's what happened with the wine story. So it's under the agriculture division, but the wine folks in Missouri started sending me information and numbers. And like you, I was like, wow, I had no idea. And how big it would have been had Prohibition not really knocked it down.
Right.
But again, it's booming again, and it's going to get a lot bigger here in the future.
That it is, and of course, along with Missouri wine, there's an Anheuser-Busch.
Right.
I mean, you can't talk about Missouri wine without talking about AB.
And the family's impact on the state is really amazing too. And we just did on our TV show the other day, we did Grant's Farm out there, which is a little history tour in itself. But Ulysses S. Grant's house across the way. And then we actually got up close to the big mansion out of Grant's. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's so weird because the people in St. Louis, they're just, the Bush family, they're just one of us, right? They're not. But we see them everywhere. You see them at the mall, you see them, and you drive by that house and you realize they're billionaires. It's like one of the wealthiest families in the world. And you don't really get it, I don't think, until you were around that sort of opulence. You see the house they have. And like they were telling us the story that just a couple of weeks ago, one of the grandkids, I believe, was having a party and they flew pit bull into town. I'm like, really? That's like 2 miles from my house. Pit bull was hanging out here and it was 2 miles. Yeah, I interviewed Tim McGraw hanging out in the mansion several years ago. So, I mean, it's different level stuff, but they're ours. I mean, that family we claim them as ours.
Yes.
And you see the impact they've had, and I detail some of the stories about how they made it through Prohibition. And then, of course, delivering the beer to Washington, D.C. right after it. It's all just such cool stories and iconic parts of Americana that's all based right here in St. Louis.
It's funny because sometimes you don't even think about that.
You don't.
You don't.
When people, and that's one of those things, I'm going to do a little tangent here on you because I think a lot of times that happens. We live right next to an iconic family and people all over the world say, oh, Bush family. And to us, it's like, yeah, it's their house. They live in Huntley. You drive by their house. Yeah, there's like 6 of their mansions over there. All their offspring live over there. Their other mansions at Grant's Farm. And the reason that I'm doing a tangent here is we sometimes don't value what's close to us. When I was writing this one, I ran across a number of the number of people in St. Louis who have never visited the Gateway Arch. Over half of people who live in the St. Louis area have never been to the Gateway Arch. And I said, how is it possible that the most iconic symbol of Missouri, St. Louis, you see the evening news, there's the arch and the Space Needle.
You sit at Busch Stadium and you can see.
You see it. Every time they show St. Louis, they show the arch. How is it half the people in our community see it every day, maybe drive by it every day on the Poplar Street Bridge and say, nah, I'm not gonna go in again today. Half the people here have never been inside. Now, I understand if you're in a fear of heights, but because it's always just been there, you don't value it. And yet people will fly from around the world
Yep.
into this town just to go up in that arch, marvel at the architecture, do the history research, and it's just there for us.
Well, it's amazing to think that the arch was built, the final piece was put in place in what, 1960?
67, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, well before we were born,
Right.
of course.
Mhm.
But yeah, just,
Yeah,
and it's lasting, and it's still there, and it is fantastic. And in the entrance, the museum and all the history that's down there.
all that's been redone. Yeah, and so that's, you know, that was one of the reasons that, to me, it's so important. When I talk about doing 4 books in this 1 year, people say, why did you do that? Because I think it's important. This is our bicentennial year. You only get one. And
Yeah.
here we're coming out of a pandemic. The state of Missouri hasn't been able to fully prepare for this because they were shut down. And all the activities that were supposed to be this year, they're just not happening. And here we have wine country, hour and a half drive away.
Right.
We have iconic destinations in Brant and Springfield and right here in St. Louis. And sometimes we think that we have to fly somewhere to see world-class attractions. And so with this being the year where people are starting to do things again, but most people say, I don't feel comfortable traveling yet. You have all these things right here that you can see with your families. People say, I want to travel with my family this year.
Right.
Well, look at all there is to do right here. So that's why I think it's important. That's why I'm hoping to get people whipped up about not only our history, but our future here in Missouri too. There are great things happening here that we need to explore.
There are. This was in the illustrated timeline, 200 years it was really fun to read. I have been inspired to take more road trips.
Good.
So along
Good.
with this, but also of course, 100 places.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there are some very unique Missouri nuggets of history in your book.
Okay.
So for instance, I had no idea that osteopathic medicine started here in 1874.
Yeah.
What?
Dr. Still, man, my stepdad's an osteopath. So I grew up with osteopathic medicine. And even when I was growing up, you know, 70s, 80s, it was kind of seen as alternative medicine or whatever. Now it's much more mainstream. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me when we have doctors on the screen and we put their name up below and you see DO. To me, I say, well, that's come a long ways because when we were traveling around the state of Missouri, and like you said, I lived in almost 24 places in Missouri, all before graduation from college. Part of that was moving around with my stepdad, looking for a place for him to practice in Missouri. And a lot of the places that were looking for a doctor, these small towns in outstate Missouri, they would say, oh, you're not an MD. And there was this fear that, wait, you're not an MD, you're not a real doctor. Because people didn't understand what osteopathic medicine was. You growing up on the West Coast, it's big out there. Osteopathic medicine is, I think, much more accepted, and it has been, it's more accepted everywhere now. But yet developed right here because Dr. Still's belief that the whole body can heal itself. He didn't, and in his philosophy, and like my stepdad always said, there's a time for surgery, there's a time for medicine, but there's also a time for your body to heal itself. And that was his core belief, is that your body has some mechanisms in place that you don't need to jump straight into surgery. So he came up with all of this. So in addition to someone like a Dr. Still coming up with that, changing medicine, you had Dr. Rusk, the father of rehabilitative medicine. And I just spoke yesterday with Rusk Rehabilitative Medicine Institute in New York, because he's going to be in my next Missouri Legends book.
Thanks.
And so it hit me yesterday. I'm like, oh my gosh, 2 guys who like transformed medicine, in addition to Bernard McFadden, who was Mr. Low Carb Atkins diet before it was even a thing. They thought he was a quack. He would be a huge star today. And he's from Arnold, Missouri. You know, these guys who transformed health and medicine, again, right here from Missouri, and people don't even know that they exist.
Nope.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was like, whoa, look at that.
Yeah, where'd that one come from? And that's what, yes, so now they have the Still Hospital Division over here on, I believe it's Abandonment, anyway, in South St. Louis. There's a branch of the school down there. Kirksville, of course, the original school.
Right.
Old Still Hospital in Jefferson City. So yeah, it runs deep in the state of Missouri.
It does. Pleasant surprise.
Yeah, it is neat.
It was. And then they followed that up with, you followed that up with, the first all-steel bridge constructed in 1879. How did we get that far?
That's the one in Glasgow, right? If I'm trying to remember,
Yes,
yeah, over in
yeah.
Glasgow. I that's one of those, another one of random things. I graduated college in Fayette, Missouri. And so Glasgow was just a few miles away. And so I don't even know where I came across that one. You know, because I do these deep dives, and probably in doing some research on Missouri Firsts or, you know, something off the Eads Bridge, ran across that one. And to me, it was just so baffling because Glasgow is such a small town.
Right.
And as with all of my research, you get into a topic like that, and you're like, okay, Glasgow. Well, let's see what else happened in Glasgow. Then you find out one of the gentlemen with the highest IQ of all time comes from Glasgow. His dad ran the observatory in Fayette. The guy from Glasgow went on to be like Carnegie's top thinker, you know, and he was a professor at MIT. You're like, this is how I write. I go down these rabbit holes and then I find these nuggets. I'm like, okay, yes, it's random information, but that's going to motivate somebody from mid-Missouri who's on a small farm thinking, there's no way out. I can't afford to go to college. I'm working my family farm. And then you see stories like this. And so I go out to these schools and say, no, wait a second. You can't use that as an excuse. If you want to, these people did it. You can do it too.
Right.
And to me, that's the greatest joy I get out of these events like this, where we get to talk to people and then going into schools and then helping to tell kids these stories to where they can say, you know what, yeah, just because you're from a small town in the middle of Missouri, maybe not much of an educational background, your parents never went to college, who cares? Here's the roadmap. People did it before. Now you go do it. To me, that's a lot of fun.
That is awesome. I also liked, in 1943, George Washington Carver's National Monument was established.
First one for an African American, right here in Missouri. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and Diamond, Missouri. And again, just spoke with the guy who runs the National Park Service down there. And I know most people in Missouri know he's a big deal.
Right.
And I wrote about him in this first one, and it was kind of the first time I ever really looked in. We studied about him in college or in high school, or whatever. You understand his historical impact. But when you see everything he did, now that you get older and you appreciate it, it blows you away. Because to think how he became that smart from where he came from. You know, a guy who didn't know his father. Was he a slave? Was he somebody who was just brought over from a neighboring slave farm? He was told a number of different stories. Did he get much of an education? Probably not. And yet here's the guy who went to transform agriculture. He's testified in front of Congress about agricultural farming techniques. It was so good. And I didn't know this one until just this week. His testimony in front of Congress was so good. It was supposed to be like a 10-minute testimony. They kept him there forever because he was so brilliant that these Congress members, and the Congress members back then are the same as they are today, although there weren't cameras around, they kept him there forever asking questions. They were so impressed by his intellect and his speaking ability. And I thought, this is a guy who grew up on a farm. Was he a slave? Maybe some said he may have been born free, but he was a slave, okay? So here's a guy who grew up as a slave on a farm in Diamond, Missouri, and somehow developed such an intellect that he came up with 300 uses for the peanut, 150 for the sweet potato, the Tuskegee Institute. I mean, all this stuff. So it made me feel pretty small, right? I have all these opportunities in front of me like we all do. Education right there in front of us. You can get to college if you want to. This guy didn't have those opportunities. He made opportunities. Went to his first college, shows up, they're like, oh, you're black. Sorry, you can't come here. And he had to go find another college to go to. To me, I'm like, wow, how much motivation and drive did that guy have in order to do what he did? And yet we have all this presented in front of us all the time and we don't get it done.
He has got an amazing story.
Yeah. Well, see, and I get excited about this stuff. and I try and motivate my children too, because they'll be like, I got a little homework to do. I'm like, put down the phone, you'll never guess what George Washington Carver did. he had no phone, he walked to the, and,
Right.
you know, you
That's,
just want to
if
get
you're
them excited.
reading, it does so much more than just
Right.
that.
Yeah, and then like, yeah, Dad, he also did a lot more than you. You've had a lot more time. I'm like, okay. In the conversation, go to your room, you're grounded.
Thanks for the reminder. So there was something else I thought was really fun.
Yeah.
Is the Carphone's debut.
Yeah, right here in downtown St. Louis.
It is 1946.
Okay.
folks, and the Carphone debuts.
If you would have guessed when Carphone's debut, I said, when I first found it, I thought it had to be the 80s, right?
Yes.
Because I remember the first person I knew that had a Carphone had to be like 91 maybe. And I thought 40s, and St. Louis was the first city to test them and to put them into place. There were these huge bricks.
Sure.
And I had no idea that that was such a big part of St. Louis history here. And really anything automotive seems to have dated back to here, like not even close to here, just a few blocks away, if I'm not mistaken. The first gas station was just a few blocks away from where we are right now. Carphones, right here. Corvettes, a few blocks away from here. So yeah, the car buffs, anytime I write something in relation to cars, I hear from all of them who's like, oh, you know that, but do you know?
You got this, but did you know this?
Right, and I know it's because the car industry has always been so big here in St. Louis. The people in this town know their cars and their car history. So I didn't know that one, but probably the car buffs in town, I knew that one.
They probably did.
What's wrong with you people?
Fascinating little nuggets of history just about St. Louis.
Yeah.
So yeah, because of course, and those are just the smaller ones.
Yeah.
You know, there's also some more major events that happen here in Missouri that of course impacted nationwide as well as the state. That you highlight, the Dred Scott decision.
Again, just a few blocks away. One of the things I do with my kids, and I hope you can use the books as kind of that, is knowing where these historical spots are, that you can take little road trips. And I think for me and my family and I, that is the most impactful thing that we've done. And I say that because this one always sticks out to me. So we knew that Dred Scott happened here, the court case here, and you know, a lot of people don't understand the relationship between Susan Elizabeth Blow, first kindergarten, you know, and family of the attorney and all this. And so it's all connected. All these legendary St. Louis families were all connected in these big moments. As I say, the Missouri legends, famous people are famous because they did famous things. And so this book is actually spin off of that because those people did these things. It all ties together. But the reason I was telling that about the road trips is the jail that Dred Scott was held in is down around Cairo, Illinois. And we were driving, when we drive to Florida, I love going that way because there's so much history down in Cairo about how that town was huge and then kind of fell apart. But as you're driving that way, I saw one of those little roadside markers, Dred Scott's jailhouse. I'm like, whoa, here we go. Kids are like, can we ever drive straight to somewhere? I'm like, no, we're not, because we need to see this.
Right.
So this jail is up on the hill overlooking the Mississippi River. And you get out there and you look and you're like, wow, okay, so he was held over here. And so all this kind of cool stuff of how it all ties together. And to me, that's important because when you take them to these places, it's different than just reading it in a book. And when you know where these spots are, like up and down between here and Springfield, we never just go here
From
to
here to
Springfield. Yeah, because there's stuff to see, you know, Route 66 history and all that. And so that's how I also encourage people to use the books is, you know, don't just drive from here to Kansas City or here to Missouri or whatever. There's stuff to see that's had a huge impact. Get out, read the markers, and if not just for you, as adults we get it, right? I love reading markers. It drives the kids nuts. I want to stop and read every marker. But for them, if they can see something that makes them actually come alive, it's just different because then it's tangible. Then they can say, oh, that's the house, you know, Laura Ingalls Wilder. Oh, there's the house that she built later on in life. And when she started writing the Little House on the Prairie series. Like, they never would have got that unless we drove out to Mansfield, Missouri. Then they could see it. And then they're like, yeah, wasn't she was old when she started writing. Yeah, I can't remember the exact date, but she was like 60s, 70s, 80s, something like that when she stared writing the Little House series.
Yeah, she was not a young spring.
No, so, you know, she had a whole life before she ever started her career. So to me, when teaching kids history like this, you have to do that kind of stuff because like all of us, I didn't care about history until I got older. It's all, you're almost history, right? I didn't care. But that's, to me, I think that's the way that I've been able to use these books in teaching my kids is road trips and stuff that I'll see. I'm like, okay, like road rolls. There's a history behind that. How they started that little restaurant in a little storefront in Sykeston. Like, well, guess what, kids? One, we're gonna eat. Two, we're gonna learn the history of this joint. And so they've been in a couple of my books as well, just because I think it's a cool story. How it all happened.
It is. So you brought up the markers.
Yeah.
So in your, I think it's your introduction in the Missouri Illustrated Timeline, you talk about this 2,318 historical markers in the historical marker database.
I went through them all. I went through every single one. Well, not only did I go through every single one. So if you go on to, I think it's the historical marker database.
Historical marker database,
Yeah, you can click through them and see what they are. And a lot of them are, I don't know, Uncle Bill slept here. Okay, great.
Sure.
Whatever historical marker. But sometimes that's probably how I ran across the steel bridge in Glasgow. is you going through these, somebody knew to put a marker up, and you're like, wait a second, that's not your typical Lewis and Clark crossed the river right here. And so I went through all of them, trying to make sure, and I did that because I didn't want to miss any part of the state.
Okay.
When I put these books together, from Missouri Legends and all the books, the problem with doing a book like that is it's heavily centered in St. Louis. One, because we're older. Two, because we're bigger. So much happens here.
Right.
So I want to include everybody. So that's why I go through these databases. But in addition to all the markers for this book, and there's a picture. I don't know if you marked this one. I'll try and show the camera as well. St. Charles. So I also went through all 49,000 pictures at the Secretary of State's site.
Okay,
I went through
that
every one.
is.
And the reason I was able to get through 49,000, whatever the number is, pictures, is most are man with child in snow.
Okay.
There's like 50 of those pictures, click, 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 and then you can get through them. But you find nuggets like this, and I hope you can see this. The St. Charles.
Yes.
And so I don't know how close you can see it. If you can, I'll try and get close. I won't do this because you may not be able to see it. No, I'm just looking stupid here. But this picture on about St. Charles. I was clicking through the pictures and I'm like, what is that? And so I had to go do some digging to figure out what it was. And that was the original bridge between St. Louis County and St. Charles. So back about the time St. Charles became the capital, that's how they got back and forth. And if you think about it, that's just a bunch of stuff strung together.
Right.
And that's how they took horse and buggy back and forth. And I think, we've all been out there by the river. Think of the stuff that floats down the river and can hit this, the flooding, everything else. And so I said, wait. And so I pulled this up. I showed the publishers, like, I've never seen a picture. I sent it to the historians. They said, I've never seen a picture. So I called the Secretary of State, one of the archivists, and I said, how many people have accessed this picture? And he's like, I can't tell if anybody's accessed the picture. And I don't know how well they can determine who's. I hadn't seen that anywhere. And I'm like, but that tells the story. That shows that, because you just think, oh, St. Charles was the capital, St. Louis was wanted to be the capital, but the state lawmakers said, no. Early lawmakers, and we can talk about that too, because I love the politics of that. Even back then, you didn't think, well, how did they get to St. Charles? Because there's a big river between. And then you see a picture like that, and you're like, oh my gosh, that tells the story. So that's the kind of nuggets I would run across that I've included in the books that I think helps tell the story even better. So
It made it more fascinating for
yeah,
me.
that's to me too. To me too.
For me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like, since you touched on it,
Yeah.
it seems like the legislators back in the day were prepared for becoming a state.
Yeah.
Like they had already planned ahead. Jefferson City, all of a sudden, poof, you're a state. Poof, Jefferson City's the capital, and we're gonna borrow St. Charles just for a little while.
See, to me, I give a whole speech on this because I think it's so fascinating. Because even in 1820, and I'm going to hear from one historian who says, see, it's not the 200th birthday. Last year was the 200th birthday, because that's when we started functioning as a state.
Okay.
That's why our official state seal has the wrong number on it. If you look at it, the Roman numerals say 1820, not 1821. Because that's when we officially started functioning as a state, but we did not become a state until 1821, just for the record. That's what it says in the books.
August 10th.
Yeah. So this to me is fascinating. So even back then, they started to realize that having Washington DC so far away from the other states that are being developed, it caused big problems. And so what they didn't want, St. Louis was already powerful, St. Louis was already wealthy back in the 1820s. And what they did, or late 1819, that era, what they didn't want to do was create the same situation where people couldn't get to the capital. Because you think about some of these states, it was several days to get to the seat of government. And then what would happen in the government, it would take several more days, if not weeks or months, to get back to the people. So they said, okay, they already had this outstate versus St. Louis division going on, even back then. So they said, yeah, you're where all the power is, you're the territorial seat of government for the Louisiana Territory Purchase, but no, you're not gonna be the capital. You're not even gonna be the temporary capital. We're gonna put it out in St. Charles. So we're gonna put the capital. We don't have any place yet, but we're gonna find the most central spot we can find that has transportation. So they found some land in the middle of Missouri, up on the bluffs by the Missouri River. There were already trails going out there. Didn't even have a name. They found this spot of land. Did you see the name that they gave it? No one knows this. I was so fast, I didn't know this. And they named it Missouriopolis.
Yeah.
And then it became the city, right? I know, I had never seen that.
What?
Yeah, and then it became the city of Jefferson, and then it became Jefferson City. We are the only state ever, obviously, unless there's another one that comes up somewhere, that actually invented a seat of government for our state. Every other state used an existing city. We're the only one who invented it. And so they put it as central as possible. And so then they started developing the capital. But again, in the meantime, they wouldn't even let St. Louis be the temporary capital. St. Charles says, okay, we're not gonna let that happen. We'll even give you free places to stay.
Yeah.
We'll give you a free room and board and just get it out of St. Louis. So when people say, well, how did this division happen? Where it's outstate Missouri versus St. Louis on everything. It's still that way. And I worked in Jefferson City in the Capitol building for years. And you see it. I mean, it's the division has always been there. And I always wonder, well, where did this happen? Oh, it happened back in 1821. It's always been that way. And for whatever reason, and like I said, that's where a lot of the race issues have come from, I believe. It's where a lot of the division has come from. It's where the voting patterns come from, the congressional districts. It's always been here. And so when they're like, well, we just need to get past this. I'm like, really, how are you gonna do that? Been here 200 years, and you think you're going to Jeff City, now you're gonna fix it. It's gonna take a lot more than that. Because it's been ingrained. 200 years, that's some deep roots. So knowing our history like that, it's the same way as knowing why all of our municipalities sprung up, knowing why they all sprung up in the St. Louis area. A lot of race issues, a lot of fiefdom issues. You don't just get rid of that stuff overnight. So knowing the history of this, when you hear politicians come up and say, I'm gonna fix it, really, in your 4 years? Good luck.
Good luck.
Right.
Yeah.
It changed your perspective. And it's changed mine in my day job of how I cover politics in the news. Because when I hear people say these things now, I can ask them more pointed questions and say, well, how is what you're gonna do different than the 1970s? Because, okay, one of the things that's coming out, and the political show that I used to host, Hancock and County, we were just talking about this the other day on KMOX radio as well. On the very same day, in the Post-Dispatch, I think it was like 1975, there were issues of crime in North St. Louis. And there was another issue, something with the Cardinals, like whatever, Cardinals needing pitching, so it's something, right? And then legislature approves bill for high-speed rail across the state of Missouri. In the 1970s, and yet here we debated this, 3 years ago with Hyperloop?
Still talking about it.
Had we known that, I could have said, yeah, because they set aside the funding for a commission to study. And I'm like, well, instead of setting aside more money to study this again, why don't you go back and look at the money we set aside back in 1976? The first time we studied it. So again, people say, well, why should I study history? Because we do repeat it. Every few years, we do the same studies and try and come up with new solutions to the same problems that we never solved the first time.
History has a tendency to
Right,
repeat
oddly
itself.
enough, right?
Yeah. So if you had to choose just one, who is the biggest rogue in an illustrated timeline?
The biggest rogue. We've got some. That whole, Well, it would depend, okay, I can't pick one,
Okay.
because I'll pick two genres. One, when you read the stuff about what happened right after the Civil War, I mean, Quantrill's gang, those guys were just nasty. You know, the stuff that they did, and Jesse James, I mean, they were all together, so it's kind of hard, because they all did the same stuff. They were all together, you know, roaming the countryside, and that's what the timeline does, is it puts it in perspective, is you have these guys roaming the countryside, pulling people off of trains, slaughtering women and children, men, troops, everybody right in front of, right in front of the train there. At the same time that's going on, you have St. Louis University being developed, you have the Mizzou Medical School being built, you have still osteopathic medicine being found right in the same area. And you're like, wow, you just think you compartmentalize history. You don't think of Jesse James and Quantrill and the younger gang and those guys doing that stuff. At the same time, you have a doctor still inventing medicine,
Right.
like a few miles apart. That whole genre of people, I think, because they all did the same kind of things. But Kenneth LaLaye is the other one. He would also be one of the rogues because of what he did to so many people's futures. I mean, people don't realize he was a Missouri guy, small town Missouri guy, went to Mizzou, then of course led Enron and then killed Enron along with everybody's, financial retirements and everything else. So rogues for different reasons. One would, some were killers, one killed people's futures. But, with Kenneth LaLaye, it was so interesting because Mizzou was getting ready to name, the builder just named a building after him. Like I think it was months before it all went down. And that's one of those where they were like, let's take this off the wall. This name probably shouldn't be on a business building anymore. But yeah, and then people don't realize he was a Missouri guy because he got so much attention in Texas, but again, Missouri.
Came from here.
He came from here.
He came from here. So how about hero? So the other end of the
Goodness,
spectrum.
there are a lot of, that one would be tough because of all of the people.
So many great people.
Yeah, even just pulling up, again, so many different genres, even on the cover of the deal, I was just gonna see who I had on the cover of this back then. Harry S. Truman, you think about how his decision changed the future of humanity, really, right? So some people would say he's a hero, and then others say, well, did he have to use, now there's a big debate, did he have to use the atomic weapon at that point? But in Missouri, he would definitely be a hero. Mark Twain, that would be a tough one for all the medical advances. I mean, gosh, that's no one's asked me who would be the biggest because it's always hard to choose from.
So how about your top 5 most interesting in the past 200 years?
Gotta go with Brad Pitt for one.
Okay.
And because we live next door to this family in Springfield, and I kind of know the family.
Oh, fun.
And to me, I'm so intrigued by. And then, I say that because my publisher and I always argued. We were talking about the next version of Missouri Legends, and right now it's huge. It started out like 1,000 pages. It needs to be 300 something. Okay, who do I leave out? I'm in the process of locking people off right now. I'm like, okay, they get it smaller and maybe they don't make it. And so he's like, does Brad Pitt have to be there? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the only man ever named People Magazine Sexiest Man Alive twice? And like, right. And it's like, and again, he's one of those where in hindsight, he will go down as perhaps one of the most iconic actors ever. And it resonates with me because we lived in Springfield for so long. And we knew his family, used to have dinner with lunch with his brother every Thursday, our men's group, we get together. And I think what's strange about it is when you get to know him as people, and your brother really is like the most iconic actor in how is that possible that he's with your family? I don't even get this. So to me, I think it always stuck out because it's so close to home. And because you hear stories like a Robert Redford and people like that, and you're like, ooh, they're just people. And I think to me, the ones that always stand out to me when it comes to some of these people are the ones I've been able to interview. And, like a Walter Cronkite.
Oh, nice.
Who oddly enough didn't want to be in the book. That was a strange one to me. And I don't know why he asked to be taken out of Missouri Legends, which was kind of strange just before he died. And I thought that was kind of strange. And I don't know if he didn't, and I don't know why. Whether he didn't want to be known as Missouri anymore, whether he wanted to be known as a national figure. I'm like, no, you're from here.
He had quite a lifespan career.
Yeah, in Texas, maybe he thought more of himself as a Texan, because I know it's time to split between here and there. But those are the kind of people, because growing up, the people who you put on a pillar and then got to meet them later, even like an Albert Pujols, you know,
Okay.
just Ozzie Smith. Some of these people, although Ozzie's not in here. And people always, that's another question real quick, they're like, well, how did you determine who was from here? And I said, well, how did you determine who was a Missouri legend? I said, well, I used the basic Missouri question. Did you go to high school? So I used formative years, and that's my demarcation line, and I used the Jack Buck, Joe Buck line. Jack Buck, people say, oh, he's in Missouri. No, he didn't grow up here. Joe Buck grew up here, went to high school here, but Jack didn't. So Jack's not in the book. Joe Buck is in the book because he spent his formative years here. So yeah, so getting to know those people and get to know them as not just icons, but being able to interview them and know them as people, I think has been really cool. And it changed my perspective because, and you know, I think we're going through that a lot right now. This is kind of a really tangent, it's been on my mind a lot lately, because we have this debate of, you know, should we take names off buildings for racial issues, for past? And I heard a discussion the other day that, you know, no one's perfect. Yes, they may have done great things. We all have flaws. And the reason I say that is because I've been able to interview some of these people. I realize they aren't just people, right? Yeah, I write about them doing some amazing things in their life. And I'm like, they went down to Lake in the Ozarks and were floating on an inner tube just like I was as a kid. They did float trips. They did road trips. They hung out at, you know, the old Chesterfield, that kind of stuff. And so it's really changed my perspective on writing about these people, that they weren't just always great. Does that make sense? They weren't just always icons. Like, you know, Joe Buck used to just run around town.
Right.
And you think, no, he was always studying broadcasting. He was always at the Cardinals. No, he's a guy who was just out running around doing his thing. John Hamm, I just wrote his biography the other day. You know, family life, divorce, you know, this is, right. So when you really dive into these people, it just gives you a different perspective on them. And to me, it's a lot of fun to realize that they are just people. Yeah, they're icons, but they have the same flaws that we do, made the same mistakes that we do. Sure. And so that's one thing I hope I'm able to do is humanize these guys a little bit.
Nice.
That was a weird answer to your question, but that's been on my mind lately in writing these, because it changes the way you write. Because you do find out, you know, you think you write about some of these people. I can't name one. Oh, Harry S. Truman. You know, so I've been doing the research on him. I'm rewriting his bio from 2008, looking to see what's new. Like a lot of stuff has come out about T.S. Eliot.
Okay.
And I wrote this, you know, my entry from 2008 is completely different because one of his biographers read it and said, oh, but we just got all of his letters about the other woman that he was infatuated with and how his marriage was this. And you're like, okay. In looking back about Truman, now I'm seeing so much criticism about, no, some of his advisors said, don't do this, because you think everybody was on board. Let's do this. Let's drop the bomb. We're going to move forward. But there was division. You know, people my age didn't really get that. Now I'm starting to get it. So it changed the way you do research, knowing that all people are flawed. And you start to see their flaws in the way they make decisions. And as a parent now, you as well as a parent, you're like, all decisions are not cut and dry. They're not all easy. You do weigh all these decisions heavily, not just for yourself, but for others. And so it's changed my writing even since 2008, over the past 12 or 13 years, how I approach all these topics. Right. So my writing's evolved in that way. So again, a bit of a tangent, but it's, you know, in rewriting some of these bios, that's, I think, what stuck out to me.
That was actually, I was going to ask you about some of the writing process that you do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been easier during the pandemic because nobody's been able to go anywhere until now, finally. And so I guess that did help. But I will, a piece of advice, if you are ever going to release a book like this one, and you have a big book tour scheduled, don't do it right before a pandemic sets. Not the best approach. So I was supposed to have this big event at Union Station. We had this big gala scheduled. I think it was March or April. was April of last year.
Okay.
And that got canceled, pushed it back a month. We're like, oh, it'll be over in a month. Yeah, that didn't happen. Then the book tour, and it all just starts falling from there. But then that's when we decided, okay, we got time, John, you've had these projects on your mind. And so really, everything that I did for this was such a monster project, and so much didn't fit.
Okay.
Things that weren't necessarily the biggest moments in Missouri history, but were still cool moments. I just kind of put them to the side, and all my research was kind of over here. And then when we came up with Missouri 365, it fit that. Okay, what date? So I plugged those in. So all the research kind of tied together, and with the Missouri legends, like I said, famous people do famous things. That's what they're famous. And so I would just be in my basement going down these wormholes, and that's kind of how it went. And I write just like I talk, and it drives my editor nuts. He's like, "Really, you say this?" So I write like I do the news. I try to be conversational. He's like, "Okay, well, we need to put a period somewhere in the sentence." That's probably a good time for that. But to me, it's just it's a labor of love. It's not hard for me to do this. I enjoy it. It's my passion. Now I at least have a little background to have some perspective to draw from. And so to me, I just have fun doing it.
So who has the pleasure of editing? Is that you, or is that your editor?
No, Reedy Press. They take care of all of that. That's why when people say I'm gonna self-publish, I just shake my head and I'm like, okay, you must be either really, really smart or you have no idea what's coming next. Because have you ever published a book? Okay, just check. It is the way to find out just how stupid you are. When you get the first draft back. When I got the first draft back of all my books, you look at it and you're like, how dumb am I? There's not one paragraph, there's not 50 changes. But that's why you have editors, to fix all this stuff. And things change, like I'm an Oxford comma guy. They're like, oh, we don't do Oxford comma. I'm like, I do an Oxford comma. How do you know what's the full list of things then? I want an Oxford comma in here. And so yeah, I have an editor do all that because I just, again, it makes you realize that you really don't know, the stuff you learned when you're a kid and the parts of speech and all this. I'm like, well, obviously I didn't learn that very well because now my editor's showing me just how dumb I am. And they're like, but this is what we do all day. You don't do this. So we keep up on this stuff. That's our job. So let the experts do their thing, is what I say.
I'm good with that.
Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I totally agree. So now that you've written some history and you have some more history coming,
Mhm.
do you think you'll ever write a work of fiction?
My daughter's working on one right now. And so we were talking about that last night. I've got good ideas. I just don't know if I can craft it. And so I did help her craft a serial killer. I don't want to give away too much here.
No.
Because I know how legal it is, but it's based on Double Jeopardy.
Okay.
And it's twins.
Interesting.
And one ends up killing somebody, but the wrong one goes on trial. And then we kind of twist it to where the wrong one goes on trial, found not guilty, so can try the other guy for the same, but then they end up living the rest of their life as one person, so they can never go on trial again. Now, some attorney's gonna say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I've got some legal work to do. It's a work in progress. Let me brainstorm. So it's based on that. And so I don't know if it helped her at all, but she's the creative one. I am creative, but since I write news copy all day, mine's more or less just the facts kind of thing. Maybe if I could get away from this for a bit, I could let the creative side flow. But right now I'm so wrapped up trying to finish book 4 this year, I probably can't.
So top 5 places to go.
In Missouri.
In Missouri.
Okay. To me, one of the best. It's on the cover of 100 Things to Do in Missouri Before You Die. Behind 100, you can see it there. And a lot of people think it's just what do you call it? Just pictures, right?
Sure.
That's Dogwood Canyon down in Branson. And really any of those big cedar properties. What Johnny Morris has done with that area, with the Tiger Woods Golf Course, to Big Cedar, to Dogwood Canyon, that to me is like the best getaway close to home. 4 hours from here, to get down there. I also love the getaways down to Elephant Rocks area. To me, it's just beautiful, and it's close enough. You can get down there. It's a nice little getaway. The drive down to Potosi, Kimmswick, that whole area. There's little candy stops along the way, little candy stores that have popped up. Oh, and we go crazy. My family, we know where the candy stops are, and we can do some damage. Really, that was $45 for his bag? Okay, we'll stop at the next one. We'll eat this and we'll stop at the next one.
Right.
Also love like Rocheport. Love Rocheport, the winery that's up there, and went to school in Fayette, so I love that area too. So the Columbia trip is a great one. Downtown Kansas City has been transformed. I don't know if you've been able to do that trip yet, but as we're coming out of the pandemic, that town, I hate to say it, but they've kind of outdistanced us when it comes to reviving the downtown right now. St. Louis is, I saw the Shell building being redone right here, Ballpark Village. St. Louis is moving forward. Kansas City's moved a little further. Downtown Kansas City with the Power and Light District, the hotels down there, unbelievable. Super safe to walk, lots of restaurants, concerts coming back down there. I love that area. And then I grew up around Lake of the Ozarks, so to me, that's getting back home to the home people.
The home people.
Even though, yeah, it's not what it was when I was growing up. When you're a kid, it's different. But that's still, so those are my 5.
It's a little big.
Yeah.
A little bit bigger now.
And it's different because that's, when you grow up at Lake of the Ozarks, people always want to ask me about the experience growing up down there because people don't know people who grew up down there. That's a place that St. Louisans go and then leave, right?
Right.
And I said, well, it's different. You had to be careful dating because like everybody was my cousin. Mom's like, yeah, probably shouldn't date the Myers girl because she is family. I'm like, Mom, everybody's family down there. I gotta leave. I gotta move to St. Louis.
Leaving. So what is the next book that's coming out? We were talking about it before it started.
Okay, Missouri 365 comes out in about a month. And that one is the biggest news story for every day of the year in our first 200 years. That one's due out in about a month. And I am finishing up Missouri Legends. So the revival, because this one is the one, you guys, if you're in St. Louis, remember the big fire, the warehouse fire. All those burned up. So we're redoing it for the most famous Missourians in our first 200 years. So a lot of additions in this one. And so that one's going to be out in October. So 365 coming out in about a month. We're guessing July, August, probably August. And then Missouri Legends in October. And that one I'm looking forward to. I think you have an affinity for your first one and being able to redo it and freshen it up and put in people like a John Hamm. You got people like that. So a lot of Olympians from the St. Louis area. Jack Dorsey from Twitter we were talking about.
Right.
You think about people who've become icons in 12 or 13 years. That's how quick it can happen. And now they go down in the history books. And so being able to redo it at this point is kind of cool to see who's come on the scene.
That's really neat.
Yeah. Carly Kloss, also,
Right.
Yeah.
Taylor Coleman.
Yeah.
Will Bruin.
Right. So many.
Soccer players.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Exciting. Cool. I look forward to it.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
looking forward to it.
I look forward to getting that last one done.
So we have been talking a lot. Are there any questions from the audience? Mary's kind of quiet.
No questions so far.
No
None
questions
so
so
far.
far.
Okay.
That's all right. So we'll take a few minutes just in case anyone's got one.
Okay.
I'm gonna take a sip of my water.
Okay, sounds good. And that's what, and I'll tell you very quick. One of the ways that I typically wrap up my speeches is what I was telling you about the passion I have for going out in these schools. Because when I was growing up in mid-Missouri, I didn't know anybody who was a news anchor, right? I was going to become a doctor. My degree's in biology and chemistry, like you said. People like, how'd you do that? Well, I knew a doctor, right? And so that's all I knew how to do. And what I realized is kids become what they see, and they become what they know they can do. I knew I could do that because my stepdad did. And so it wasn't that unusual. And so if you tell kids and you show kids and what they can become, then they realize it's possible. So again, I didn't know any news anchors. We barely had TV out where I grew up. So I didn't know any. And so now, after seeing all these stories, you think about the guy who invented the microchip, the guy who invented the Learjet, the guy who invented GPS, just all these amazing stories. You start to realize that anything is possible. from all these parts of Missouri. And that's what I get such passion for, is going into these schools and being able to talk to groups, whether it's the entire school body, which I've done, or small groups, where you have these kids, you can kind of tell they don't know. They've never heard, like me, a small town, 1,233 people in my hometown where I grew up, where I graduated. And I just didn't know what was possible. And so then you tell them, they said, well, I don't know, I've always thought about being fill in the blank. And you're like, well, hey, let's set this up. And you find out, I don't know, pro baseball player was from there. Then the kids are like, wow, really? Pro baseball player came from here? Yeah. Or, a guy who invented something. A guy who invented 7-Up. Was from a small town out in Missouri.
It wasn't originally called 7-Up.
Right.
But you'll have to get the book.
Bib lithiated. I can't even say the whole thing.
It's some sort of.
Bib labeled lithiated lemon lime soda, I think is what. And it was
really something.
And it was named after lithium.
Right.
Because it had medicinal properties in it. It was so cool. And so again, and then it never did. Charles Leeper Grigg never did say why he named 7-Up. Lost to history. No one has any idea why it's 7-Up.
But it's a lot easier to say.
Yes, it is. I'm not having whatever that is.
Right.
But again, just being able to go out into these schools and tell kids, great things have happened. People have done it from here before. Here's what they did. And you find your roadmap, because they've done it. There's no reason why you can't either. The opportunities now are a whole lot greater than they were back then. So find your roadmap, like the number of astronauts in here. It's amazing the number of people who have been some of the first. And here, even in St. Louis, we helped build the rockets that went up for NASA. The bricks that helped build Kennedy Space Center were manufactured in Mexico, Missouri. All these little nuggets of history. And so you start putting it together and you start to get a bigger picture and saying, okay, we're not just flyover country. We're not just some throwaway state. Amazing things have happened here. And so those are the kind of stories I like to tell.
Speaking of, there was a doctor at WashU who won was it the Nobel Prize?
Couple of them.
Yes. Is he, I may be thinking of the wrong guy, but is it the same guy that also helped recently discover part of the COVID vaccine? Is it a different guy?
I'm not for sure about that, but if you want to talk, again, you're talking about amazing minds,
Yes.
world-class minds, and you're like, oh, all that's happening right there. The CAT scan developed right there on the campus of WashU. Nobel Prizes coming from that as well, or at least nominations. The DNA, that's it's in one of the books. I think the DNA sequencing that President Clinton said was one of the greatest marvels of all time. Bulk of that done right here. Danforth plant sciences, transforming agricultural science for the next generation. My goodness, we're poised for greatness too. And that's the other thing, is it's not just a great history, but if we can get a lot of things put together, we have a great future here too.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Mary, any questions, ma'am?
Well, I did talk a lot. I've answered everything before they even
How did you get from biology and chemistry to your club?
Okay, 1994 was the first debate over socialized medicine, Hillary care, right? So I interned at all these, 4 or 5 hospitals, and there was so much uncertainty right now. Everybody was, we don't know what's going to happen. Don't go into medicine right now unless you truly. That was kind of like maybe not. And so I ran off to Miami.
Okay.
And after that, after 2 years on South Beach, I was never really going back to medical school. I got into it, but it worked out well. I got into radio at that point, but what's interesting is funny how things happen, right? I struggled in my science classes. I did well, but I struggled. It took me 10 times the amount of work in my science classes as it did in history, public speaking. I was great in history and public speaking and philosophy and things like that. I excelled. No one ever said, hey, maybe you should go down this path, not so much this path, but here I was doing everything right. I was interning, I was getting, got the degree, got the advanced classes, struggling, kind of hated my last 2 years of college because I had to work 10 times harder than everybody else because I wasn't that smart in that area. Where I was smart, college would have been a lot more fun. I could have been at the winery a whole lot more had I gone this path, but I just didn't. I didn't know. And so it's funny how all things work out. So when they said, hey, if you're not truly set on this without knowing what the future holds and all this kind of stuff, it worked out well. And medicine never really changed that much. I did, and it worked out well for everybody because I'm not seeing patients. Which I'm sure everybody's happy about. God intervened.
So, where's your next event? Where can we find out more about John Brown and what is?
You know what, if you go to, really the best place, MissouriLegends.com. That's my website based off the first book. That's where you can get copies, signed copies of the book. You can order them there as well. It is the most, kind of like my talks, the most bizarre nuggets of wormhole material. Like the biggest houses in Missouri, I have the top 10 list of biggest houses, which you would think would be in Ladue or somewhere like that.
Right.
The 3 biggest are down in the Branson area.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah, 52,000 square feet is the biggest house. They never moved in. Then another one's like 44,000, and there's another 30-some thousand. And then there's some, right? Yeah, wow. So those are the kind of nuggets that are on there, like biggest high schools, biggest, so everything kind of Missouri trivia is on MissouriLegends.com. And you can order all the books there for Father's Day. I mean, awesome. But that has a lot of my info, a lot of private speaking engagements coming up, Missouri Secretary of State's office, but there is a lot coming up with the bicentennial coming up in August. So there'll be many more.
Missouri2021.org for
That's their
folks
site.
interested in the Missouri Bicentennial and upcoming events taking place statewide
Mhm.
for that. And then stay tuned for more bicentennial events that the library will also be celebrating. They're just quiet right now.
Right. Everything has been. So at least now we're starting, I know the state's starting to ramp up some things. There'll be big celebrations in Jeff City. So I'll probably be spending a lot of time at my mom's in Jeff City, and then like the Ozarks going.
Fantastic. Well, I will say thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone who participated and joined us in this talk this afternoon. Again, it was recorded and it will be posted to the library's YouTube page. We hope you get out and enjoy a beautiful day.
Yes.